Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of our Thrive in China Roundtable. For those of you that are new, this is a weekly roundtable that we organize, highlighting different topics and trends associated with regulations in both China and Hong Kong. Today, we're going to be talking about the supervisory role. Prior to starting, however, we just want to go through a couple of slides introducing who we are. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is one of the most trusted business setup and corporate administration advisory firms in China and Hong Kong. Our specialization is inbound investment into China and Hong Kong. This means that 100% of our clients are foreign investors, different countries, different sectors and industries who are all looking to enter the Chinese market, or Hong Kong market. We offer a variety of different services ranging from trademark registrations all the way through to company incorporation, and then the accounting, tax, payroll, and corporate governance solutions. We also offer, just pertaining to today's topic, the appointment of supervisory roles as well. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm one of the leading experts on inbound investment into China. I have over 20 years of experience only in the Chinese corporate services and compliance sector. My brother always gets angry because I never mention Hong Kong. We are headquartered in Hong Kong. However, my brother's expertise is in corporate services and corporate compliance in Hong Kong. I have personally helped over 750 companies with their market entry into Hong Kong, finding the right business models that fit their resources in the terms of financial resources, time resources, etc. And I've helped them implement, grow, and scale within the Chinese market. All right, that's enough about us. Today's topic is about the supervisory role. Now, to give you a bit of context, when you incorporate an entity in China, you are required to appoint an individual to hold this title of supervisor. A lot of people don't actually know the history of this or how it stemmed. We've had this role probably, I want to say, for the last 12, 13 years, so it has not actually been forever. This role started because small, medium-sized companies were doing things that were non-compliant within their organizations. And the issue resulted in that the shareholders were not aware of this non-compliance, which had actually started from either the board of directors, legal rep, general manager. And as a consequence, the idea of a supervisor/supervisory board was implemented in order to be able to find out whether companies were actually in compliance. The instigation of all of this was in Guangzhou, a very large multinational had their first employee protest. It was in the automotive sector. They had over 1,500 to 2,000 people on the streets because they knew things were not going in compliance. I think they had an issue that their social insurances had not been properly calculated. It is obviously the responsibility of the board of directors, legal rep, GM to supervise that. What happened then is the whole trade union evolution came into play. Trade unions only come into play if you've got, I believe, 30 staff or more. You don't have to set up a trade union, but the starting point is at 30 employees or more. And the trade union rep is actually supposed to be part of the supervisory board, okay? In smaller organizations, this one appointment of one supervisor is absolutely fine, but that's the history of it, okay? Now, I also have to highlight what is coming up. According to the new company law that came out in January and will only be implemented on the 1st of July, 2024, is that you are no longer required to appoint a supervisor within your company. But it's actually left to your own devices whether you do or you don't want to have somebody in this role. I'm hoping today will highlight the importance of having a supervisor in that role, again, for protecting your business against non-compliance. It is then up to you to decide whether you want to outsource that role to an expert on the ground or whether you want to appoint somebody within your own company to hold that role. Okay. I also want to highlight that we do not know at the point of 1st of July, 2nd of July, etc., whether in the computer system of the Ministry of Commerce, whether that box is going to be deleted where you actually have to put the name of the individual and also upload his passport copy. If the situation is that no local government is changing that online platform and system, it means you are required still to appoint a supervisor. I want everybody to remember that in China, when laws come out, it doesn't mean that it is actually executed by the individual governments in the various cities. Okay. So I still find this topic relevant. I did have my staff say, why are you touching on this topic when it's going to be kind of revoked come July? It's not revoked. It's up to you as a company to decide whether you want it or not. And I think it's an important thing because a lot of people don't know what the role is supposed to do, who actually should be holding it. Even if you bring it in-house, who are the people who should be doing this? So that is the whole point of today's discussion. We are also ending today's discussion on the actual liabilities and responsibilities of this role. Okay. If you guys already have an entity in China and you're just updating yourselves on the supervisor and what they do, I do want to highlight that in the articles of association that you have signed, there is a chapter on the supervisor and the roles and responsibilities, which can be amended depending on who your lawyer or incorporation agent is. The standard template for the roles and responsibilities of the supervisor, there's like 5 items in that. It's really up to you as a company whether you expand that or not within the articles of association. So the first chapter I was going to talk about today was what is the supervisory role in China. I think I've given you an idea of the history of it and what is their role. I just wanted to highlight it here. You as a shareholder, I'm hoping that there are people here who are shareholders, or you as an executive of a shareholder, you can make this role anything you want it to be. What you need to understand is the fundamentals that a supervisor is there to supervise that your Chinese subsidiary is in compliance, and their job is to report to the shareholder in case of non-compliance. You can then expand on that and you can say that actually, no, the supervisor is there to manage people. In fact, I want the supervisor to manage the relationships within the board of directors, legal rep, GM, and senior management. If there are any fundamental issues with that relationship, they need to report that to the shareholder. You can also say the supervisor has to ensure compliance, not only in the financial aspects of the business, but they need to ensure compliance within the supply chain, within the different departments of your organization. They are responsible for creating the standard operating guidelines and procedures, and they are appointed because they also have to execute on that. All right. You can also have the supervisor promote productivity within your organization. If they feel that your management is not stirring productivity, but is actually creating an inefficient organization, it's your job to report that to the shareholder. They may also be there for communication coordination. We all know there are language barriers, cultural barriers within the organization. If you are taking on a supervisor that's helping with that development, they should be able to do that as well. Performance evaluation and feedback. When I say performance evaluation, I mean performance evaluation of the Chinese subsidiary and providing feedback to whom? The shareholder, right? If they are looking at the financial management reports and they are totally off whack from their budgets or the milestones, goals, and objectives you're trying to reach, they need to be reporting that to the shareholder as soon as it happens. Team building and motivation. I mean, I don't know a lot of supervisors who will do that function, but ask them to coordinate that, organize that. Problem solving is actually everybody's role within the Chinese subsidiary, but obviously the supervisor is there to make sure the company is non-compliant. Obviously, if the company is non-compliant, they have to get them, troubleshoot and get them out of that situation and ultimately report to the show. I'm going to give you the example of myself. I am a supervisor on several of my clients' companies. However, I limit my responsibility and liability to what I know, which is finance. Okay, so in finance, I am required to do the financial management reports, look at the internal procedures within the financial department, expand on that in terms of communication guidelines between the different departments of the company. Through finance, I'm ensuring compliance, that contracts are in order, things are there, because we need copies of this. The finance department needs copies of all of that. I don't promote productivity, but I will tell you if there's an inefficiency within the standard operating guidelines, and that's just from my own personal experience. I sometimes feel that myself and my team are therapists for a lot of our clients in terms of evaluating performance, communication, coordination, team building, etc. We kind of are helping to build this bridge, I suppose, between the Chinese subsidiary and the headquarters. I have never really had clients, because we've created or we've outsourced from the start and therefore created that foundation. I've never really had serious issues arise. It usually comes in when I'm asked to do internal audits or health checks, where we go transaction by transaction to review. And that is where I will immediately report to shareholders on funny transactions. I was a supervisor on a joint venture, and we found intercompany transactions between the Chinese partner and in his own private company that were then immediately reversed. Obviously, it was a mistake, but it was funny to see that in the books. It was something I raised with HQ, and lo and behold, the problem was that the finance team of this Chinese shareholder was the same finance team of the Chinese shareholders' company, right? They were using the same people, and they had made a human error mistake. That transaction was supposed to be for the other entity. So it just showed that they needed to have their own resources for the joint venture to prevent these types of mistakes. So these are the types of things that the supervisor should be there to detect and ensure that it is then reported to the shareholder. I also want to reiterate, the supervisor is not there to report to the board of directors, the executive director, the supervisor, the GM. If they are the same people, then yes, but if they are not the same people, it is not their job to report to them. They are there to be an external party to report to the shareholder of any mishappenings or even poor decision making. Let's look a little bit at the strategic importance of the supervisory role, okay? In theory, the supervisor is there and should be aware of the objectives and goals of this Chinese subsidiary. They should be there to execute upon or inform whether milestones are being hit according to the strategy that's been developed by the shareholder, the board of directors, etc. Okay, so they are there to execute on this and also keep an up-to-date feedback on whether these milestones are being hit or not. It's not, I mean, some people might not take this seriously, but I do believe it is up to somebody within the company to act as a bridge. Many people don't want to hold that role. Many people don't have the skill set to hold that role. The supervisor should be holding that role as a bridge for language barrier, cultural aspects, just between the headquarters and the Chinese subsidiary. Like I said, almost like a therapist, that middle ground, interpreting what each one wants, needs, and communicating that from both sides. This bridge is fundamental. Figuring out that bridge is fundamental. Once that bridge collapses, chaos ensues. Please trust me on that. They are predominantly there, again, for regulatory compliance and risk management. Okay, that out of the 5 points in the Articles of Association, this is actually one of them. It's compliance, making sure that the company is in compliance according to PRC company regulations, number 1, and according to internal company regulations, number 2. Okay. Talent development and retention. I don't know how much a supervisor can really be responsible for that, or whether it's their strategic decision. I guess it depends on what type of expertise they have. I am certainly not there to develop somebody's talent or retain staff. That really has to come from the general manager and the senior managers within the company. Adaptation to local market dynamics. I mean, again, the supervisor is there to supervise, and if they see changes within the market dynamics, they need to report this to the shareholder and say, guys, we're not going to hit certain milestones. We've got to pivot the company, right? Supply chain management. Again, it's not that the supervisor is going to get involved in the day-to-day with this, but the supervisor should be bringing along with them a network of third-party providers that you can gain access to improve the efficiency of your supply chain management, right? You will probably have somebody internally who manages all of that and deals with the contract negotiations. But if you see one bad egg within that whole supply chain, you got to get rid of them and find alternatives. And the supervisor, in theory, through their expertise, should be bringing that into the company. Last but not least, it's conflict resolution. You might need lawyers, depends on how serious the situation is. The supervisor is there to report non-compliance to the shareholder. They're going to be starting conflicts, okay? In theory, they should be listening to all sides before they report to the shareholder. They might not be part of the conflict resolution if they were the ones who started the conflict, but certainly if there's conflict within the board of directors, if there's conflict within senior management personnel, they are ultimately that bridge to resolve these conflicts and handle the relationship management. So if you would ask me now, before we head on to the other chapters within this roundtable, if you would ask me now, who should be appointed in this role? If you wanted to do this in-house, okay, 2 people come into my mind. And again, it really depends on the size of your organization. The first one would be your CFO. Okay. Now, CFOs tend to be introverted individuals that they might not be involved in all of these different aspects. The second person that comes to my mind who would be involved in all of these different aspects would be your in-house legal team. A lot of small, medium-sized companies don't have in-house legal individuals, which is why I tend to go with CFOs. You generally have a finance manager somewhere or a CFO somewhere who can take on that responsibility. You just need to, when you're out, if you're planning on outsourcing it, similar to whether you're trying to appoint somebody with in-house to do it, you've got to look at the responsibilities you're looking for and whether that individual can match those responsibilities. What are their weaknesses? What are their strengths? What can they do so that you are meeting expectations, right? I tell my clients up front, I am not there to adapt to local market dynamics. I'm going to look at your financials and tell you where you're at, where you should be going, but it really needs to come from your sales team, your BD team, etc. if you have to pivot, right? Talent development and retention. Again, that's ideas that need to come from your HR department. I'm more than happy to tell you what we do internally, but that is something that also has to be developed and executed upon in-house. If you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat box. We are going to have a Q&A at the end, right? How to drive success with a supervisor in China, whether you are placing somebody in-house or whether you're planning on outsourcing. I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what you need to discuss with them about this role, right? How are you going to use them properly? I know way too many companies who have, entrepreneurs, small, medium-sized companies who have actually appointed their wives. They just didn't have anybody else in the company who wanted to take it on, have appointed their wives to be in these roles and nothing is done, right? I mean, the wife isn't in the business and it's just to get a passport copy, get it part of the registration, and that's it. I leave that up to you, okay, what you want to do. If you're going to take this role seriously and you really want to get something out of this role, then and you want it to be successful, and you want to be able to sleep at night knowing that the supervisor you have appointed is doing their job, again, whether that's your in-house CFO, in-house legal, or somebody you're outsourcing, you need to define clear objective and expectations. Okay. Now, either you do it or the person who's offering the service does it and says, this is the objectives. These are my expectations. What are your expectations in response? Okay. Select reliable and qualified partners, people who have the experience, who have been on the ground, or have a team of people on the ground who can support this role. You want people that you can rely on, who are going to give you that feedback. Like I said, the main point of this is that they are reporting to the shareholder for non-compliance or suspicious activity, if you want to call it something else. Okay. You've got to establish effective communication channels. So when I am supervisor, it is mandatory a minimum of 1 call per month, if not more, if not every 2 weeks. Depends on the size of the company, how active that company is, whether it wants to have 2 calls or not, but minimum 1. And it's not just with me, it's also with my team that they are aware. My expectation is that on that call, there's a variety of people on there, not just the shareholder. Because if we're going to be talking about serious issues, everybody needs to be on board. Okay. If there are sensitive issues, then you also need to create a communication channel that's the supervisor can pick up the phone and say, listen, I just saw a transaction that's not okay. I don't want to talk about it in front of the other team members. I want to talk about it with you first, and what action should we be doing? So you also have to have that private communication channel and that team communication channel. Training and support, that really comes down to who's going to hold that role. Do they need extra training and support? My preference would be that you are hiring somebody or appointing somebody that doesn't need that extra step. But I want to highlight that depending, it really comes down to what your objectives and expectations are. Monitoring performance and quality assurance. I mean, it is your job to monitor the role of the supervisor. Okay. The supervisor is going to be there. Are they doing their job properly? Are they giving you reports? Are you talking to them often enough that you know what is going on within your company and you've got complete transparency that you can sleep at night? Okay. You need to monitor performance. If the supervisor isn't doing their job well enough, get rid of them and appoint somebody else. Foster a collaborative culture. This is so key. A lot of when you outsource this role, a lot of internal team members in China may feel that this person is a obstruction. Okay. And it can foster anger. It can foster frustration. It can foster a misunderstanding of what actually that person is there for. It can foster a lot of different things. What I want to tell you about a collaborative culture is that this person is here to supervise that the company is doing well. The objective and the goal, the win-win solution, is that you grow and scale. It's everybody's vision, right? It's no fun for me to be a supervisor for a company that's going downhill. I don't enjoy that. Those calls are horrible, right? I want to be in a company that is exciting, growing, scaling, pivoting, changing, and it's taking action and executing on decisions. I want to be involved with everybody. It is really important for you as a shareholder, team leader, to educate your team on why this role is there. And I want to give you guys an example of this. In China, you have chops. I'll show you mine. This is my company chop. Okay, I keep it. You also have the option of and this is utilized on all contracts and all of that. Now, when you are creating standard operating guidelines for your company to protect your business, I want to highlight this. We are creating guidelines that everybody is clear on what their job, role, responsibility is, but it is also about creating guidelines that you have system processes in place. People know where to get approvals from, and nobody is taking initiative on themselves, right? You don't want a junior sales guy to be able to sign whatever contracts they want if you're going to be losing money off of it. You need to have a system in place that he tells his superior who then, depending on the contract size, might need to go to his superior to get approvals, right? And contracts have to be chopped in some shape or form. Now, you can also get what's called a business chop that doesn't have the same legal power, but it can be kept inside your office and utilized on purchase orders, supplier confirmations, like these types of things. Doesn't really have any value. I had the case of being a supervisor on a client of mine and getting yelled at by the internal administrative team that I was a roadblock for the growth of their business because the shareholder had decided that no chops were going to be kept within the office, but their belief was that I had instigated that decision. Supervisors are not there to make decisions. They are there to report to the shareholders. I want to reiterate that, okay? They are there to report to the shareholders on the actual circumstances. They are also there to advise the shareholders on the pros and cons of system processes. If the shareholder or the headquarter decides on an action, they need to have the courage to tell their team, we know this might not be so efficient, but we want to have a protective system in place that might not be efficient, might slow things down. But ultimately, what they're indirectly saying is we don't trust you enough to keep the jobs. And as a consequence, you have to live with it. So the supervisor, if they are constantly blamed for decisions made by the HQ and the HQ doesn't have the courage to tell their team that they're making these decisions and puts it all on the supervisor, this is not going to be a collaborative culture. That supervisor is going to get a wall built up where they're not going to be able to understand whether things are going smoothly within the company, whether the company is in compliance or non-compliance. So I just want to highlight that because I do find that extremely, extremely important. And again, manage risks effectively. In this example I'm giving you about chop usage, I have to give clients the pros and cons of how to structure that. What are the risks? What are the liabilities? What could the staff do? I do at certain times say to clients, for the first 6 months, make sure somebody else keeps it. As you build trust with your team, as you build loyalty with your team, as you know that your team is not just going to leave you or steal it, bring it in-house. All right. We are creating system processes that are flexible, that you can pivot in. All right. And again, I believe in the Kaizen philosophy, which is every day 1% improvement. We want to drive continuous improvement. Okay. I get that the team is frustrated. Probably for the first year, let's just deal with the frustration. But at some point, you also have to trust the team that they're going to take responsibility and help improve efficiency, right? And give them the chops. Listen, I've had decisions made by headquarters where they outsource the chop usage for the duration of their establishment. These are decisions you have to make as shareholders, as board of directors, etc. Now, outsourcing the supervisory role. So a little bit of disclaimer, right? There's going to be pros and there's going to be cons of outsourcing. And I wanted in this presentation to highlight all of them. What are the pros of outsourcing this role, and what are the challenges of outsourcing this role? If you outsource it, I've put this as a pro. You can avoid the costs associated with recruiting, training, or providing allowances, benefits, or other overhead expenses. Why do I say that? Well, because I've had clients who said, we will get an external party and they're going to be a full-time staff just doing this role. I do not believe that this role is a full-time role. Okay. So if you outsource it, of course, that service provider, that individual will charge you a fee. They should. If you keep it in-house, my assumption is that your CFO or your in-house legal counsel will not charge you extra. They won't ask for a salary increase, although I have seen it a couple of times that they have asked for a salary increase. You've got to weigh out the pros and cons of keeping it in-house or outsourcing it, okay? The cost element is always going to be a rather bigger deciding factor. Flexibility. Now, I think the flexibility aspect comes into play when companies cannot find people within their organization to hold these roles because these individuals are too scared about what the repercussions or consequences might be for holding those roles, okay? So until you do find somebody who wants to hold it, you can outsource it. and outsource it for an indeterminate time frame. You don't have to do it forever. You can have somebody who holds this role for 6 months. You do have to go to the Ministry of Commerce to do the change of supervisor, i.e. change the individuals, but it doesn't have to be for an indeterminate time frame. In your articles of association, it generally states in the standard template that this term is held for 3 years. I mean, if you want to terminate earlier, nobody's going to stop you from terminating. Okay. Do, however, make sure that you have a separate service agreement for this role. Access to expertise. I think for me, this is the biggest pro. If you hire your in-house, if you have your in-house legal counsel or in-house CFO hold these roles, and they are managing a whole bunch of different subsidiaries, I don't know how much expertise they will have specific to China, where they can properly advise and guide you through the various steps. They also might not be able to notice or be aware of the red flags, etc. Having somebody on the ground who does have certain expertise in a certain area, I mean, that knowledge level is invaluable. I mean, knowledge is always invaluable. But look at what their network is, how they can help you, in what areas can they help you, and also understand their limitations. By outsourcing it, it's going to help you focus on core competencies, because ultimately my belief is when I don't call the shareholder, no news is good news. I'm not bothering them. They can focus on the core competencies. I'm only reaching out to them when there's a red flag, a suspicious activity, or I actually see non-compliance. We want to grow at the beginning of your incorporation phase. You want to grow, and so you do need to focus a lot of your attention on the core functions of your organization, the building of those core functions. And so supervising is something else. Risk management. Now, obviously, when you are a foreign investor coming into China, you may not know. I mean, you only know what you know, right? The issue is you don't know what you don't know. And you don't know what certain risks are. We've all grown up. When I say we, I have grown up in Hong Kong. I have learned about doing business in Asia, in China. I am extremely familiar with what you do and what you don't do in this territory. If you would say to me now, Christina, in Brazil, what do you do and what don't you do? I have no clue. I've never done business there. I've never been on the ground there. I would not know. In China, I know. Our goal is to mitigate risk. Okay, we want to have a smooth growth and scaling up. We want to prevent roadblocks and obstacles coming our way. Obviously, when you are outsourcing the supervisory role, you're outsourcing it to an expert who will guide you and make you aware of how to mitigate risk, what things to watch out for. They will be educating you on all these aspects, and you are basically giving that responsibility to them to mitigate the risk. It is, like I wrote here, it is ultimately a buffer for the company. But there are always going to be challenges when you outsource. These challenges will only come down to what you decide to give to them as responsibilities. Okay? If you give them everything that I have already mentioned, you might feel like you've got a loss of control, right? That actually these partners are running your business, and you don't actually have the transparency you need, right? So when you are signing up with them, make sure you've got, again, like I said, clear communication channels, but that you've also got performance metrics to know that you're hitting your milestones and your goals and objectives, and that they are fulfilling what they promised to fulfill for you. Cultural and language barriers is another thing. Again, this doesn't really come into play if you hire an expert who speaks the languages and handles all of those aspects. Quality and reliability, again, you want to work with somebody who is going to offer you that quality and reliability, and you want to make sure you've got the service agreements in place to have that available. Data security and confidentiality is key. How are you going to communicate? What access of information do the supervisors have? Make sure that you've got these security measures in place, confidentiality agreements, compliance protocols, etc. Transition and integration. I mean, If you, again, use this role effectively, then, and you constantly change who the supervisors are, there is going to be an onboarding that's needed, training. There has to be a smooth transition. You want to avoid disruptions. If you fire somebody and put somebody in place, it could cause confusion about what's actually been happening in the company. They won't have the history to be able to guide you accordingly. Navigating the cultural complexities. Again, this is all about if you hire a supervisor who is not familiar with the Chinese environment. So I did want to just highlight here things about cultural awareness, cross-cultural communication, relationship building. I mean, the supervisor should be taking all of this in hand, building that bridge to prevent any misunderstandings and miscommunications from happening. Now, what are the operational efficiencies and cost optimizations of a supervisor in China? What we want to create in our entity in China is process improvements. If the supervisor can provide that advice, that is key. We want resource allocation. The more mentors we have or coaches we have guiding our foundation and our company is critical. Lean management principles can be implemented as well. Might not be implemented necessarily by the supervisor, but the supervisor might supervise that. Supplier management, do you want the supervisor to be vetting and doing due diligence and KYC processes on the suppliers? Quality control assurance, not just for products, but also for service, for all aspects of the supply chain. Employee training and development. I mean, these are functions of what the supervisor should be supervising on, right? And making sure that all of these aspects are according to Chinese compliance regulations, okay? And guiding through that. So I wanted to finish off today's presentation with what are the risks and liabilities of holding a supervisory appointment in China, because I think this is ultimately what people want to understand. I don't know if I am paused or not. Am I back? You guys could give me just a thumbs up if you can hear me again. I felt like I was paused. But let me know. I think I'm back now. So I think a lot of people have come to the event to understand what are the risks and liabilities of holding this position. If you want to appoint certain people into this role, this is the part of the roundtable that you want them to listen to, okay? So let's go a little bit one by one. I've got about eight different risks and liabilities I want people to be aware of. So supervisors in China are responsible for the legal and regulatory compliance of the company, meaning for your industry and sector, what are the relevant laws? What are the relevant regulations? What are your industry standards? Are you abiding by these? Have you implemented processes that you can abide by this? Failure to comply with legal and regulatory compliance requirements, and especially if you don't report these to the shareholders, can result in fines, penalties, legal disputes, as well as then reputational damage with the government bureaus. Financial mismanagement. This is critical, and this is why I take on the role of supervisor. It's because I'm checking the finances of the company to be able to avoid financial mismanagement. My role, however, the liability that I'm holding on is that I have to make sure that there is no mismanagement, that there's no fraud, that there's no embezzlement, that there are no financial irregularities that occur under my supervision, okay? If they do occur, it is my job to then go to the shareholder and report it. This can include things as well that are the accounting practices, financial reporting deadlines, internal controls, corporate governance principles, etc. Supervisors are also responsible for managing employee relations, including everything from the recruitment process through to training, performance evaluation, and disciplinary actions. And again, if they don't report to the shareholder, on any of these issues, then problems that arise are legal claims to the company, grievances, labor disputes, etc. Healthy and safety compliance is obviously critical. We want to avoid workplace accidents, injuries, occupational illnesses, legal liabilities around the working environment. We want a healthy working environment, and we want to make sure there are safety regulations there. This obviously pertains more to manufacturing companies, assembling companies, warehouses, than it would be if you had a desk job in a commercial building, right? Ethical and corporate governance issues. What I mean by this is breaches of ethic, conflicts of interest, shareholder lawsuits, anything that could damage the reputation of the company. We want to be able to promote high ethical standards within the company, promote corporate governance principles. If the board of directors, GM, legal rep are not doing this, again, it's the job of the supervisor to notice it, become aware of it, report it to the shareholder. I mentioned earlier data security and privacy. This has really become a big issue. We want to have standard operating guidelines in terms of how data is utilized, how data is managed, how it is being protected. We want to only give access to those that are authorized to certain data. And obviously, if there is a misuse of data or disclosure of information, there can be issues that arise. Contractual obligations and business relationships. This has everything to do with whether contracts actually exist, whether they're real, whether the terms and conditions are actually being implemented. If, again, you don't report this to the shareholders, there are issues, okay? And basically, the shareholder can say, I've appointed you to take on these roles. It is your obligation to make sure all of these aspects are in compliance. Last but not least, it's crisis management and reputation risk. Kind of hard to do for supervisors, but in any case, if there are crises, emergencies, unforeseen events that affect the financial stability of the company, affect the reputation of the company, affect the operations of the company, again, it's up to the supervisor to be reporting this. Now, supervisors need to exercise diligence. They need to exercise integrity, sound judgment to fulfill these obligations. A lot of the time, I also go by gut instinct, which I have because of the amount of experience, because ultimately you are reporting to the stakeholders on how your company is moving along. So that is the end of today's presentation. It was short and sweet, but I hope I was able to give you insight into the supervisory role in China and why it might be advantageous to outsource it to somebody who can actually fulfill these obligations. Supervisors can be useful to you if you use them in the right way. I know too many companies who don't take on the cost of this. The supervisor is a nobody, and in the end of the day, they fall into non-compliance issues because there's nobody that is actually controlling, overseeing, and checking that the company is in compliance. If you are interested on getting started, or if you've got questions on this topic, I will be providing you with a link to my diary. I'm happy to have that one-to-one conversation. If you want to join my QR chat group, you are more than welcome to. This is my QR code. Just scan it, connect with me on WeChat, type in Thrive in China, and I will connect you to our community. Last but not least, next week we're going to be talking about the individual income tax exemption for expatriates and the continuation of that. 20th of March, we're looking at location choice in China. And on the 27th of March, we're going to be looking at Fapiaos and invoicing insights based on the 2024 system and the eFapiao system. If you guys have any questions, insert them into the chat box. If there are no questions, don't worry. I'm happy to have a one-to-one conversation with you all. That's the end of today's recording. Hope to see you again next week. Take care. Goodbye.